My name's Leighton. I've worked with Radio Parts and a couple of other groups who distribute Ubiquiti, among with other wireless products. So today, basically, what we'll be doing is just going over wireless in general, and then more specifically over Ubiquiti, the Unifi products, and obviously if there's any other questions you guys have about the point-to-point AirMax products or anything really to do with wireless in general, just shoot the questions at me as we go. Rightio, so first up, what is Wi-Fi? So Wi-Fi is fundamentally a means to transmit data without having wires. So it uses radio waves to transmit that. Used to be done via frequency, now it's done via digital. And it's fundamentally a way to get to places that you would not normally be able to get to through cabling and other means. And these days it's evolved probably past just simply getting to computers and servers and that sort of things. Now, most handheld devices or any really new technology generally has Wi-Fi incorporated into it. And as Wi-Fi progresses, we'll see this happen more and more. So yeah, as we all know, as we're going through our daily lives, there's lots of different places that now support Wi-Fi, from your home through to hotels, public areas also. You've also got now Telstra have their Wi-Fi hotspots. So it's really becoming a sort of a much larger network than what we used to be able to use, just using cables and doing that sort of stuff. So it's really evolving quite rapidly in the industry. Now Wi-Fi, yeah, fundamentally how it works, like I said, it transmits data over radio waves. Interestingly, depending on what the radio wave is, what frequency it is, the actual modulation rates, all that sort of stuff will depend on data rates and also propagation. So we'll touch a little bit on the differences with different propagation levels, whether you're talking about sort of 900 megahertz all the way up to 5 gigahertz, all that sort of stuff. So we'll touch a bit on that, and yeah, fundamentally that's how it works. Frequencies. So for any of you who's not overly familiar with Wi-Fi, you'll always hear about different frequencies, and this is very handy to know when you're going into a job, specifically what frequency you're looking at using, because obviously depending on what the devices that you're trying to connect to, you have to make sure that they're going to be on the same frequency as the devices that you're installing to make sure it'll run smoothly. And also again, propagation. So in certain instances, 2.4 is much better to use than 5 gigahertz, especially internally. Generally 2.4 is a better frequency to use due to propagation, but unfortunately due to the lack of channels that we have in 2.4, it does tend to get fairly congested. And that's where we use 5 gigahertz, because 5 gigahertz has a lot more channels, a lot more spectrum to use, and therefore you can have your network running a lot more smoother without having interference from other providers. Anyone got any questions about any of that sort of stuff? All pretty fundamental. Okay, Wi-Fi standards. So when Wi-Fi first came out, 802.11a was one of the first Wi-Fi standards to be released. It's originally created by Intel and IBM, and it wasn't very high capacity, and it was originally 5 gigahertz. So obviously it had some limitations as far as propagation and stuff like that, and it was generally used to transmit data between servers and stuff like that. That was sort of, back then was considered a lot of data, but these days it sort of can't keep up with the pace of the sort of spectrum that we have. It became more domestically available in 802.11b. That's what most of your domestic sort of wireless is, or what they would class as legacy these days. So generally speaking, you're not really going to run into 802.11b devices very often, but they do still exist. So making sure, again, you understand what frequency you're walking into, but also what wireless standard you're walking into to make sure that your access point suits that standard, because otherwise it might be on the same frequency, But if you walk into a legacy environment, I know a lot of Motorola scanners and that sort of stuff in old warehouses used to use 802.11b. You might walk in there with a brand new access point. You spend heaps of money on a Cisco or Meraki access point, put it up. If it doesn't support that standard, it's not going to make any difference. So you have to make sure that you know the standards of the Wi-Fi that you're using. 802.11g was an evolution from that. Basically, it purely came from a need of more data. So it built upon what 802.11b had already done, and it made it to 802.11g. Also notice that these two were 2.4 only. So when they become more domestic, they dropped it to 2.4, and again, that has to do with propagation more than anything else. Not necessarily spectral efficiency or anything like that. It's just simply 2.4 does propagate a lot better due to its lower frequency and longer wavelength. One that most of you will be familiar with is 802.11n. So this is still very much relevant today. Most devices will support 802.11n if nothing else, and this was brought into the 5 gigahertz range into the domestic market. So at this point, most of your phones, most of your devices will be 802.11n, or at least support 802.11n. Anything really from probably around 2008 onwards would have the support for 802.11n, and this is 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So this really made it a lot more efficient, especially in dense areas and dense markets where they couldn't just reuse 2.4, because it does get to a point where you start interfering with yourself. You've built it so much, you've got that many access points around, and because 2.4 does propagate quite well, you end up interfering with yourself, and that ends up bringing the total capacity of the network down. With the introduction of 5 gigahertz, that opened up a whole range of new channels people could use, and made it a lot easier and a lot more scalable for people to walk into events such as stadiums, shopping malls, hotels, and all that sort of stuff, and really open it up to make sure that Wi-Fi was going to run effectively without self-interference, because that's one of the main things about wireless, is that you can end up interfering with yourself, which is obviously not what you want to do. You don't want to ruin your own business. So 802.11n is generally the standard that most of you guys will run into out there in the field. The latest version is 802.11ac. Now that you will hear of Wave 1 and Wave 2, and I'll touch on a little bit of what that means fundamentally between Wave 1 and Wave 2. But 802.11ac is the latest standard, and it is the highest capacity, but it is 5 gigahertz only. So if you're walking into an environment that's 802.11ac, it will only be 5 gigahertz. They do not support that on 2.4. So do keep that in mind, that it is a 5 gigahertz only spectrum, and fundamentally that's where you're going to get most of your speeds. A lot of your residential stuff, especially your mid-range to high-end residential environments, will generally support a lot of 802.11ac, and that's going to be where a lot of your capacity and stuff comes from. So there is Wave 1, and there is Wave 2. Now what Wave 2 is, Wave 2 fundamentally brings in MU-MIMO. Now MU-MIMO stands for Multi-User Mo. So a normal access point will talk to, say, you, and then it will talk to you, and then it will come back and it'll talk to you. What happens is you get a thing called latency, and the denser the environment, the greater the latency builds, until a point where sometimes the latency can be the killer, because you're talking to that many clients, the latency builds up and you start running into issues. MU-MIMO enables the ability to talk to several clients in the one stream, down and up. This decreases latency across the board for all your clients, but also increases capacity because you're talking to more than one client at a certain time. Most of the time, MU-MIMO is not going to be necessary, especially in a domestic environment. But when you're talking in enterprise grade or in an industrial environment, or even, again, supermarkets, hotels, them sort of environments where you can get up to or over 100 plus clients, MU-MIMO does become very effective in making sure that the system runs quite well and will keep up with the demand of capacity. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. There is Wave 1 and Wave 2, and you'll see Wave 2 a lot more in the industry as time goes on.
I guess the point also about 5 gigahertz, most devices will support MMC, like your iPhones and even Unifis.
Yeah, most devices will support both these days. Again, see, like you've got a rough dates here from when sort of it's become more prevalent. So really anything from sort of 2013, even there's some stuff from 2012 that had the early version of Wave 1 AC. You will see it out there, but you will always, pretty much anything that supports AC will also support N. It's very rare to find a device that will only support AC and not support N. But AC, I mean, yeah, you walk any mobile phone you pretty much walk into these days and go buy, it'll support AC, as well as your iPads, your Mac computers, your laptops, all that sort of stuff generally supports AC. Whether it's Wave 1 or Wave 2, Wave 2 again is fairly new. It's only sort of come out in the industry in the last year or so, so it probably won't catch on as quick, but a Wave 2 access point will drop back to Wave 1. So they are fundamentally the same thing, just a slightly different protocol. It's the same chip. So if you walk into a Wave 2 environment and they do have Wave 1 devices, it will just drop back. And it's not going to be that big of a difference. But in certain environments, if you have the ability to use Wave 2, like I said, in dense environments, that's where you want to go for. So yeah, but most devices these days, correct, will support AC. So it is much more prevalent. So as you can see here, roughly, this just gives you a bit of an idea of the sort of capacities that you used to be able to get. Now, with Wi-Fi, a lot of the time you'll see, big flashy numbers thrown on boxes, 300 megabits per second, 802.11n, 300 megabits per second, or AC, over 1.8 gigabits per second. Now, when you look at that, you have to understand that that is an aggregate reading. So looking at this, 54 megabits per second, that is an aggregate. That means the total up and down. So basically what you want to do is you want to generally halve whatever the total is, and that'll give you roughly your up and down, and then take about 5 to 10% off for wireless overheads, what they class as wireless overheads. That's your latencies, your TCP/IP, packets per second, all that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, if you just get your total, you halve it, and then take about 10% off, that's going to give you a pretty good idea on what sort of speeds you'll get up and down. So as you can see, again, 802.11g, not that much capacity. As we move up into 802.11n, we have a thing called 2x2 MIMO. That means multiple in, multiple out. That means you have more than one chain of data running. So 802.11g was a single chain radio. In other words, it only had one radio sending information and one radio coming back. 802.11n opened up 2x2 MIMO, which means that there is two signals running. This become very effective because you can either have a redundant path, so it'll either send the same data on two paths. One might make it, one might not. And if you build up enough modulation or enough, if you get a good enough signal, it will run what they call MIMO A or MIMO B. If MIMO A is both on the same channel or both on the same chains, and MIMO B is where it runs different data on each chain, and that's where you reach the higher capacities up to 150 meg and whatnot. So that's how they get the speed out of it. It's fundamentally putting two G chains together to get that high capacity out of it. And then obviously you have 3x3, which is just another build upon that. It's just an extra chain that they're putting on there, which is an extra path of data. And as it reaches that high modulation, you can have 3 separate lots of data running across that onto the one radio frequency. Again, 802.11c builds dramatically on this. It's a massive jump compared to where we were. And this is due to, again, MIMO chains, but also more to do with the actual protocol and how it works, taking more advantage of the 5 gigahertz frequency. Because it is a much more recurring frequency, they can fit more data, or what they call bits per hertz, in that frequency. So that's how they get the extra capacity out of it. So you can see here MU-MIMO, so Wave 2. Rather than speaking to just one single device, as you can see here, up to 4 devices. Now this particular device that we've got featured here is the Unifi HD, yeah, high density, and that has Wave 2 technology. Again, the purpose of Wave 2 technology is to decrease latency and increase density, so that way you can have the one access point can service more clients at the same time. Is there any questions about Wave 2 or any of that sort of stuff?
I had a school that they wanted Wave 2, but So what you're saying is most their devices that would just be future proofing that they want to wave to for most their devices that won't support it anyway.
Correct. A lot of people in the industry don't necessarily understand what they're asking for. All they do is hear that it's new, you know. So especially your Cisco's, Meraki's, Arubas, all them, once they get this new technology, they bang it up as a must. You must, you know, you need Wave 2, you need this, you need that. So as it filters down, more people will go, okay, well, whatever this Wave 2 is, I really want it, I really need it. In a school environment, in some cases, especially in stadiums and that sort of stuff, Wave 2 would be actually quite effective. In a classroom environment, when you're sort of capped at around 20 to 40 clients, depending on what they're doing, whether it's whether they're streaming, you know, video footage, that sort of stuff, it may be relevant. But in most cases, a normal access point will be fine. Your latency isn't going to be that high, and you should be fine with a non-MU MIMO device. I think Ubiquiti have somewhere around 50 to 60 clients they test on their access points streaming YouTube all at one time, and they don't have any buffering issues with it. So it's MU MIMO is the latest. Wave 2 is the latest standard, and it will obviously take over the previous standard as just being the norm, but it's not a requirement as such. It's sort of just understanding where it fits, where you need to use it and where you don't need to use it. Okay, so we've learned a little bit about Wi-Fi and about what wireless is, and it all sounds pretty good, all sounds pretty great. You know, why not just use it everywhere? Okay, so whilst it has its limitations, and to really be effective in the industry that you guys are in, you have to understand those limitations. And in most cases, in fact, if not all cases, if you can wire a connection, wire it, because you're going to get better capacity out of it. It's going to be much more reliable. The reason we have Wi-Fi is because it gets to them hard to reach places. It's not for everyday use. You don't just walk in and go, okay, well, rather than wiring this house, I'm just going to whack up an access point and everything's going to be taken care of. In some cases, yes, but in other cases, if you need that extra data or if they need that extra capacity, a Wi-Fi access point is not going to be as reliable as a wired connection. So always go from a wired connection, and if you can't get a wired connection, then go to Wi-Fi and utilize what you can in that scenario. But remember, wired is still definitely where you want to be at in creating a reliable and decent network. So don't get rid of wires completely. They are still very, very necessary, at least for the time being anyway. There you go. Wi-Fi in the home. So do many of you guys do domestic installs, domestic sort of stuff, or do you do sort of more commercial grade, that sort of stuff? Sort of a little bit of domestic. So obviously, you know, as you walk into a home environment, it can be quite difficult. You know, a lot of the time we get a phone call and they call up and they go, oh, I've got a 3-story house, it's got, you know, this much square footage, how many access points do I need? And that's probably a lot of, you know, it's not that straightforward because you've got different materials that you might be trying to get through, you've got different environments, different amount of, again, you have to know what sort of devices they're using, what sort of frequency you're going to be installing. So when you're doing Wi-Fi in a home, always try and understand or let the client know that it is best to try and do a site survey of some kind before you go in, especially in a large environment. In a standard sort of residential home, you guys, obviously, as you do it, you'll get used to it. You'll have a pretty good idea on how many access points you need. But Wi-Fi in the home can be rather tricky because not all houses are the same. And obviously, different materials around Melbourne. You've got a lot of old homesteads that are, you know, double brick, that sort of stuff, very hard to penetrate. So it's always good to get an idea on the environment that you're installing in, especially in the home environment, because it is always changing and always different. And lastly, PoE. So PoE is a very interesting topic because there are so many different standards of PoE. I really would advise all of you, if you don't know a whole lot about PoE, to go home and get up to date with the different standards of PoE, what different companies use, and obviously when you're installing, especially if you're doing like a PoE switch and then running out to access points, make sure you know what kind of PoE them access points are going to be able to use, because not all access points use the same PoE. The PoE standard that Cisco done is 802.3 AF/AT. So you've got AF, which is your 48 volt, 24 watt sort of standard wattage output. Then you've got AT, which is your higher wattage output. For some of your larger, like PTZs, that sort of stuff, we'll use AT generally over AF. But they're not the only PoE standards out there. There is passive PoE. So Ubiquiti uses a lot of passive PoE, 24 volt passive, and it runs on, you have your plus on your 4 and 5 pins and your return on your 7 and 8. So there are other devices out there that might have return on 4, 5 and plus on 7 and 8. So if you go plug a passive PoE that's not regulated on a device that's running the different polarity PoE, you can destroy the device. So keep in mind what PoE the devices are using, because it's going to save you money at the end of the day. If you know what sort of devices you're using and what PoE they are using, you're not going to waste your money by plugging something in, next minute it goes pop and you go, oh, guys, John, I've just blown me access point, what do I do? Well, you should have checked the PoE, because it's got it written on the box, and you should know what you're doing with the PoE. So very important, make sure you know what PoE standard you're using when you go out there and start doing installs. Any questions on PoE? No questions?
In the Ubiquiti field, the Pros they're 48 volt, the
Yep.
Lights are 24, and they so we'll
Correct.
quickly run over.
Yep, okay. So with Ubiquiti in particular, they use a different combination of PoE. So some of their higher end devices will have 48 volt, and that will be a PoE standard now. They do support AF. They never used to. The older versions, the legacy UAP Pros and stuff like that, were just 48 volt passive. But I think more of a demand on Ubiquiti, their latest version does use an AF or AT standard. So you can run it into a standard Cisco, Dell, HP switch, plug it in, and it'll just start up. Back in the day, you plug it in and it would do nothing because it's passive. You've got to actually turn the PoE on. The LR and the light, or the lower ends of the scale of the Ubiquiti access points, is 24 volt. Was just 24 volt. They have now since released, the newer versions have both. So they have auto sensing and they have 24 volt. So they do now support AF. So most of the Ubiquiti devices or Ubiquiti access points you get now will support AF. And the way you can tell is there's a little blue mark in the bottom right hand corner of it that will say that it supports 24 volt and AF. And look, the easiest way to know is if it's not a passive switch that you're using, you plug it in and nothing happens, then it's not AF. The only issue is if you have a passive switch and it's got PoE turned on, that's where you have to be more careful. So the AF and AT standard are auto sensing. In other words, they won't turn on unless they actually get a register to power something on. So you're pretty safe with your Cisco and your HP. Ubiquiti also, all the Ubiquiti switches, the Unifi switches and the Edge switches, they all support AT and AF PoE. So if you walk in, you plug it in and it doesn't turn on, that means it's passive. But yeah, they do now support both. So
The Ubiquiti switch, you have to enable the PoE on the switch.
For the 24 volt you do, but you don't for the 48 auto sensing. So it is an auto sensing, they are an auto sensing switch. You guys, they've only just started releasing the lights and the LRs with that feature. So you guys, it's still only just filtering through. We still have some of the devices that don't support it. The reason they did that was because, again, it was just one of them things where they released this new product and then the industry basically said, why have you done passive to us again? Like it's easier just to do AF. So they've ended up turning around and doing both now. So they'll support 24 volt. The reason they kept 24 volt is because it's a lot more cost effective for them to ship PoEs that are 24 volt passive than what it is to make an AF certified PoE injector. So to keep prices low, if you buy a single AC light or LR, you will still get a 24 volt passive PoE injector with it and it will work fine. But if you do go out there and you buy a 5-pack without injectors and you use a Unifi switch, you should be able to just plug it in and it should just turn on straight away. If it doesn't, you will need to go into the switch and enable 24 volt on that particular port. Also, probably just quickly touch on the AirMax stuff. So the AirMax in regards to PoE, that is still pretty much all 24 volt. It doesn't have auto sensing. So in that scenario, you will need to enable PoE on the port that you're using. Yeah. So again, know your device, research what the device you're using, and always look at what PoE standard it is, because it's going to save you a lot of time, and it will save you money at the end of the day. If you walk out there and you take a passive switch and you walk up to a Hikvision camera and plug it in, and you enable 24 volt, nothing happens. That's because it's a 48 volt AF switch. You haven't reached the voltage that it needs, and it won't turn on. So then you've wasted your money on the switch, you've wasted your time going out there, cost dollars. So know your PoE when you go out there, understand it, and make sure you match that with either your switch or the injector that you're using. It is honestly something I would recommend you all get very familiar with, because it will save you a lot of time and money. Okay. Any other questions on any of the stuff that I've touched on at all? No? Okay. Rightio. Now more specifically, Unifi. So Unifi as a product is made by Ubiquiti. Come out probably about, I feel like I want to say about 5 years ago originally, and it was their first entry-level enterprise grade access point. To touch on that Meraki, Aruba sort of dominated, Ruckus dominated market, and their angle was they wanted to make a cost-effective, reliable access point without all the extra hardware, without all the extra software costs, without all the extra support contracts. They got rid of all that sort of dynamic. They simply made a nice, neat little Java-based controller that was software defined, and the access points were, you can control them from that. They didn't have all the features that the Meraki and that originally had when they first came out. They were fairly basic, but they met a market that not everyone needs to have a $15,000 controller just to run a couple of clients. It's unnecessary and costs a lot of money. So they hit a very niche market and have since just gone gangbusters. As that grew and as that got more and more demand, they put a lot more time and money into the design of their software, enabling a lot of other features, including payment gateways. You can do splash pages. So if you're walking into a hotel, you can do a splash page where they enter and they agree to all the terms and conditions. You can do vouchers for data limitations, speed limitations, time limitations, Facebook login. It really these days is really not many environments that the Unifi software won't cover. There are some of your really high-end stuff, but generally speaking, even in schools, a lot of schools these days use a lot of the Unifi stuff. I don't know how many schools we've rolled them out to, probably at least over 20 schools that removed their Meraki Cisco equipment and installed Unifi, because a single license cost for that year would replace the entire system. So they could nearly replace the system every year just off simply what it was going to cost them on the support for that Meraki system. So what they've seen was a great value, even if the access points didn't last that long. But they generally you should get up to a good few years out of a Ubiquiti access point. You're only paying $100, so they're quite cost effective. So they class their Unifi system as a software-defined networking. And what that means is that it's not hardware-based, it is software-based, and that makes it very flexible. So there's a lot of different environments you can walk into. You're not limited to having to put it into a rack and have to have special cabling running between all your switches and everything to make sure that it's all on the same network. It's software-defined, so you can install it on your laptop. You can go out there and configure the devices on your laptop, plug them in, and they'll run out in an environment. You can install them on servers, you can install them on cloud, so you can get instances where people were using Amazon servers and installing it on that for managed service providers. They'll install the controller on the cloud and then just layer 3 all their devices back to that cloud and manage multiple sites off that one software. So as it says, scalable, reliable, and high performance. And the Unifi software really is all those things. Any questions about the Unifi software or where it sort of sits? No? All good. Rightio. So to touch a little bit on the different access points that Unifi offer. So at the base, or say the entry level, you've got the AC light. The AC light is quite a neat, small little device, not very big. It's rather sleek looking. It's not one of those, it hasn't got the antennas sticking out. It's not big and bulky and ugly, so they're quite neat and nice. And environment where you can go and roll out, one or two will do an entire house. In most cases, one will do an entire house, but one or two will do an entire house. And very cost effective, very easy to set up, again, software defined. So they're a nice little unit, especially if you're just doing entry level stuff. The long range unit, so the purpose of the long range unit is, again, propagation more than anything else. So you will see in the industry there are some access points that will claim they've got high power. Now, high power and longer range are two different things in the Wi-Fi industry. Because it uses TCP/IP to talk to each other using the IP protocol, it has to be a two-way conversation. So I have to be able to talk to you and you have to be able to talk to me. So having a high-powered access point blasting in one direction will not give you a good Wi-Fi connection, because all you're doing is sending the information in one direction. So if you walk into an environment like this where it's thick concrete and whatnot, you set a really high-powered access point in here, you blast it, you walk out into the car park and you go, oh wow, I got great connection. Do a speed test and it's abysmal, if at all. The reason being is because the phone's not able to get through the walls back to the access point to create the handshake. So all you're doing is creating a virtual Wi-Fi network. And this happens a lot in the industry where people will get quite upset with the access points. Oh, it's crap, it doesn't work, it's useless. The access point probably isn't at fault. It's the person who installed it and thought that just turning the power up solved all their problems, and it didn't. All it does is create more problems. The long range does it in a different way by increasing antenna gain. So rather than increasing power, it increases the gain to try and take up some of that path loss between the two places. So antenna gain will generally increase the actual receive sensitivity that you're getting. So rather than putting an access point in and cranking it, it's looking more after the ability to get that signal back. It's increased its sensitivities, so that way when the device is sending information, it's able to hear them a lot better. So they're good for really quite dense environments, or environments where you've got 2 stories that have got a concrete floor in between them. The ACLR is much better at penetrating than just getting a high-powered access point and putting it in and turning it all the way up. So the LR is quite a good unit, and is effective in getting that propagation and making sure you have that connection.
Is there a way of diagnosing that issue? So the place have got a high power, you can't tell high power signal. How do you diagnose that?
Well, generally you can do it with the actual access point itself. So you'll notice on your phone, if you actually jump into your Wi-Fi network, generally most phones you can see your actual receive signal. It's measured in dB. So for most wireless standards, you want to sort of sit around neg 60 dB, and then it will drop down to neg 70s. You've got lower modulation rate. When you sort of hit your neg 80s, neg 90s, and that's about it really, the 90s is sort of the noise floor, that's when your connection's no good. So on your mobile phone, you might get a good connection. You might say neg 60, coming in neg 60, but you're still not getting a good connection. Well, generally what you can do is jump into the access point and see what receive level it's getting from the actual phone device. And if that is below a sort of a neg 70s, neg 80s, then you know that that's not going to be a good connection. So generally you can diagnose that from the access point. With the Unifi software, it's got that information in the software. When you actually look at your clients, it'll tell you the receive signal of those clients that you've got on there. So that'll give you a good idea on what sort of modulation rate, what sort of capacity you'll get. So the Unifi software is quite simple to see that information and diagnose it. And again, you want to sort of keep, to get full modulation in 802.11n, you want to sort of get around neg 64 or above, so up to your neg sort of 60, neg 58. AC is generally around neg 54, so it's a bit higher up because the modulation rate is increased, or its QAM rate, the amount of bits it's fitting into the same frequency is increased, so it needs to be a bit of a better signal. And then, as you drop down, it'll drop the modulation rates down, but the main thing is you want to check is your receive signal, and it's measured in dB, and you want to keep between that sort of 50 and 70 mark. If you're beyond that 70 mark, then you're going to run into issues, especially if you sort of hit the 80. So that's how you diagnose that. Check the access point, see what receive signal you're getting off your clients. More than anything else, that's almost more important than seeing what the clients are getting off the access point, because the access point is high powered. it has high gain antennas, and it's sending the signal out. But you need to make sure that your little mobile phone device that's got less than a dB of signal gain and power is able to get back to that access point. So does that answer that? Yep. Okay, then we sort of move into the higher tier, the AC Pro. So the AC Pro is probably one of the main standard access points that you guys will probably find out there in the industry. A lot of people go to the UAP AC Pro. A couple of reasons: price point, very nice price point for what it is, good capacity, and good propagation. So it sort of takes a bit of everything into it and delivers quite a nice access point. The main benefit of the AC Pro over the AC Lite and LR is that it's 3x3 MIMO. So remember we talked a little bit before about MIMO chains and the different data rates. So the Pro will give you a higher capacity given if you're talking to a 3x3 device. So not all devices support 3x3 or 2x2 or 4x4. As they have these days as well. So make sure you know what sort of, if you're doing a speed test of a Pro to say an iPhone or something like that, and you go, oh, it's not giving me the speed that it said, it's probably fine. The reason is because the phone you're using is only 2x2, not 3x3. So it's only taking advantage of 2 chains of data, not 3. But because it's Pro, the idea is in that enterprise environment where they are using NIC cards and servers and all that sort of stuff that will generally be 3x3, has that little bit extra capacity out of it and will give you a little bit better throughput. Next one after that is the HD. So the HD is that access point we talked about earlier that supports Wave 2 and does MIMO. Still 3x3. But you'll see the capacity difference. And that reason is because they can fit more bits per hertz when they're talking to more devices at the same time. So they do increase that, the overheads a little bit, and the actual Wave 2 protocol is a little bit better than the original Wave 1. So they get a bit more capacity out of those units. And again, they're specifically suited for high density. Hence the HD, high density. So that's what their environment's for. I mean, look, there's no reason why you can't use it in a home environment. It just depends on the sort of money that you're looking at. You want to make sure you spec the right access point for the right sort of price job. You don't want to outprice yourself or something like that, especially if someone's coming in with a standard domestic grade access point. So just keep that in mind. But they are a very nice access point, and they do have that good capacity and the Wave 2 functionality. So that pretty well wraps up the indoor stuff from Unifi as far as your different selections of the Unifi access points. And we'll move on to the outdoor stuff. Actually, the in-wall is indoor as well. Okay, so the Unifi Mesh. Unifi Mesh is brand new, and it actually replaced the existing UAP outdoors. So there used to be, I don't know if any of you guys used to use it, there used to be UAP Outdoor Plus and UAP AC Outdoor. These units replace that. Now they are designed, as it says there, mesh. They're designed for very simple meshing protocols, very easy to install, primarily in outdoor environments where you might have some trees, you might have a bit of this in the way. You can put one on the outside of the house, another one over on the shed, another one over on the pergola or something like that, and they'll mesh between themselves. Very simple to set up, not a whole lot of mucking around. You don't have to try and set them up before you go out there and make sure they're connected to each other and all that sort of stuff. They'll just sort of mesh. And because they're a meshing access point, if you've got a scenario where you've got quite a few of them and one dies, the information will reroute itself back through to get to where it needs to get to. So they're a meshing access point, very cost effective, very easy to use, and I do get asked every now and then, yes, you can use them indoors. There's no reason why you can't use them indoors. So if you do have an environment where you want to maybe put some indoors, make it nice and easy to do a setup, you can do that. There's no reason why you can't. It's just primarily they are designed for outdoor. So there's 2 units here, these small, and I do mean small, they're only about sort of yay thick, that long without the antennas, they are quite compact. Those units have 2 dipole antennas which can be removed, and they can be attached to a larger higher gain antenna. So in some instances where we've done some jobs in caravan parks and that sort of stuff, they'll use like a Ubiquiti sectorized antenna. They'll put the AC mesh on the back of it, connected in, and that'll give them higher gain, again, gain, so that's going to give them better receive sensitivity from the clients, not just necessarily the power out, but the receive sensitivity back. That's going to give them higher gain, and therefore give them a better connection to clients who might be in caravans or behind trees, that sort of stuff. So they're quite a good, very, very versatile unit. The Pro version, that's a PCB board antenna design, so it's all internal. There is no ability to put that to an external antenna, but again, it is a 3x3 unit, so designed for a little bit more capacity out of that unit. And in some instances, it is quite a neat sort of flat looking unit. Typically, we've done a lot of those in environments where there is a lot of clients. There was one not far from here not long ago. They had a bit of an event, and they decided to use those over the Unifi meshes for two reasons. A, because of the extra capacity, and B, so that way people don't come up and take the antennas off and screw the antennas. Everything's internal. There's no way anyone can really get to it and interfere with it. It'll just motor along and do what it does. Any questions about the mesh stuff? Yep. Sorry?
How many of them put the mesh together?
Okay, so when you're doing a mesh, as opposed to like bridging and stuff like that, you've got to take into account your capacity loss that you get through access points. The truth about it is you can probably really put 6 or 7 if you wanted to, but about as far as you want to go is 4, because every time you do a hop, you halve your capacity, right? So by the time you get to your 4th unit that's in line from that first one, you're looking at 1/16 of your original capacity. So it does drop off very quickly as you go on. So you want to make sure that when you're doing it, you don't just sort of keep on going and going and going. 4 deep is really about as far as you want to go. Depending on your capacity requirements, maybe even that might be too much. But keep in mind that every hop, you halve your total capacity, because it's got to have enough ability to talk to its clients, get that information and send it back to the other unit.
Just with the light, is it the same as the Unifis where blue means you got your internet connection, white means no connection?
As far as the actual lights on the units, LEDs on the units, yep. So they do have the LEDs, which will signify whether they have no connection, whether they do have a connection but don't have an actual software that they're attached to, or obviously when they're blue and they're running nicely, that means they've got a connection and they've got a software that they're assigned to, and they're all happy. Yep. And that information you can get off the Unifi website. It is handy to have on you to diagnose really quickly whether your access point's working or not, rather than having to dive back through the network and check your actual software. Just have a little printout of what the lights mean. It's quite simple to just quickly diagnose. So yes, they still do use that feature. Also, you can turn them off. So in some cases, people might put them in their bedroom or something like that, and they go to sleep and they've got this big bright blue light just lighting the room up, so you can turn them off as well. They also have a feature that you can enable through the software to find the access point. So if you haven't labelled your access points, you've just gone and installed them, there is a find button, you click it and the access point will just continually keep flashing until you unenable it. So if you're not too sure whereabouts that specific access point is, you can hit find and it'll just keep there and it'll just blink forever until you actually turn it off. So you can go out, find where it is, figure out what's going on, and come back and turn it off. So.
Is that on all the range that you turn the light off?
Correct. Yes. Yep. You can turn the light off on all of them. Yes, that's correct. Any more questions? Okay. So quite a neat little unit is the in-wall. Typically these days you're only going to see the AC in-wall. They did have a non-AC version, but they released the AC version rather quickly, and due to demand drop off from the original one, most people now only stock the AC one. This is an actual wall plate unit that will fit in your standard Ethernet socket size. It has a female RJ45 on the back of it, so you're not wiring directly, you're just using a standard RJ45 into the back of the device. It is a dual band access point, as well as having PoE pass-through and a second Ethernet port with just Ethernet pass-through. So it's quite a neat little unit, especially if you're installing it. Most people, or the area it was designed for was hotel rooms. Put one in each room. You're talking sub $100 per unit. One in each room. Not only have you got your Wi-Fi, you've got PoE out if you need it for a VoIP phone or something like that, and you've also got another Ethernet port if you wanted to use it for something like a smart TV or something like that. So they're quite good. Very localized though. Don't sort of think that they're going to give you the same sort of range as your standard Unifi ceiling mount devices. They are a localized Wi-Fi. So when you're going out there and designing it, think of it more as sort of covering only one room or 1 to 2 rooms, not covering an entire house. But yeah, they're quite good. They're quite a good unit, and a lot of demand for those at the moment. So, any questions about those? Oh, I will actually let you know, because we found them units will only run off regulated PoE. So remember again how we're talking about PoE, you've got to know what sort of PoE standards you're using. Because a lot of the Unifi or Ubiquiti stuff would run off passive 48 or regulated, a lot of people bought their the older tough switches which were just passive PoE, or they would buy a passive PoE injector, they plug it in, nothing happened. The reason being is because the PoE pass-through that it has is regulated as well, and obviously Ubiquiti don't want to be up for money. If people use a passive PoE, it then passes that passive through, they plug something in that doesn't support that voltage and then blow the other device. So they've made it so it will only run off AF PoE, because that's the only thing it's going to pass through. Again, Unifi switches all support AF, so you have no worries if you're sticking with their own range. But I know obviously D-Link do it, Cisco, all them sort of ones, their switches are all AF PoE, or what they call standard PoE. So if you do go to roll out the in-walls, make sure whatever you're using is a standard PoE device to power them. Again, probably something I should touch on as well is that all the Unifi range is PoE only. They do not have DC power packs that you can put and run into a wall socket. They are all PoE. So keep that in mind when you're going out there and designing it, that you will need to have some form of Ethernet cable go to them to power them on. If you're doing them like the meshes, that'll be just a simple case of you find a plug your injector in, run an Ethernet cable, turn it on. You don't need to have a network cable connected to it, but you do need to have that Ethernet to power the device on. Have it so it can connect to the rest of the units in the network. Okay, the Unifi AP AC EDU, probably wrongly named educational unit. It was specifically designed for the educational unit, for the educational market, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it as an educational only device. For instance, we actually have installed those in a lot of warehouses where they want to use them just simply for a PA system. So to be able to say to someone, hey, you know, we need you up this side of the warehouse, or we need you down that side of the warehouse. They are called EDU, but it doesn't have to be specifically for the educational market. So if you do have an instance where you've got someone who is installing this sort of stuff and they want to have some sort of PA system in it, you get the AC Pro is the unit they use for the actual access point, and then behind it is quite a nice speaker, and it does have quite good sound. It is a reasonable size unit, and it is a good speaker, so it does have a bit of weight about it, but they are quite good. And that the actual PA system all runs through the mobile app. So you use their application, you just enable it. You can select different areas. You can create groups of areas that you can select. So you might only want to talk to a specific access point. You might only want that specific access point to broadcast the PA, or you might want a bunch of them, or you might want the entire lot. So you can select different access points to use the PA on it. It's not just like it's going to broadcast it across the whole lot at all times. And the ACHD we've already touched on, so that's fine. Any questions about the EDU unit? Yeah.
Is there any like local device you connect to it as well? Is it only through the app you can install?
At this point in time, unfortunately, it's only through the app. They enable the PA. I am hoping that they will make it so you can use it through the actual software app as well. So that way you can run it to a computer system and then just have like a microphone coming out of that. And also the ability, I would like to see the ability for them to be able to use with third-party PA systems as well. So that way, obviously, if they have an existing PA system, they can go out there and roll them out. I think that limitation probably lost them a little bit of where they are, but they're still a really good access point. And like I said, especially in the warehouse environments and stuff like that, they're really good because you can use them and have a PA system as well as your Wi-Fi. It is quite loud. I don't know the exact dB that it comes out at, but it is quite loud. So you've got different volume levels. We had one in our office, and we actually had to end up turning it down because if someone would say something and we were on the phone, it was really quite loud. So they do have a bit of punch about them. Like I said, they are a decent sized speaker that sits behind them, and they have got a fairly big magnet in the back of them as well. So they are a decent unit. They're not a small, cheaply made unit in any way or form. So they are quite good. Yep.
And are you able to speak through your phone?
Correct. Yes, that is currently the only actual method of doing it is through your phone. So you have the Unifi app on your phone, connect it to the rest of the other Unifi software that you've got, and then you just run it through your phone. You can, like I said, you can select specific ones, you can select groups of them, and you just simply hit the mic button, talk, and turn it off, and away you go. So yeah. Yeah, but the sound quality out of them is quite good. Even we tested them running music through them, and they work still even good. Had good sound through the music, so well, not too bad at all. Any other questions? Okay, last but not least, the Unifi CloudKey. So the Unifi CloudKey is fundamentally like a smartphone computer, pretty much. It houses the software on it. It will run locally on your switch or your network, and from there you can run all your access points back to that device without needing to install it on a server or needing to install it on a computer. And the good thing is, because it's sitting on a switch, it's running all the time. So for any statistic information or any diagnostic information, it's really good because you'll have that there running all the time, storing all the information. It's okay in some circumstances just to do it on your laptop, go to the person's house, put it in, and it will run, and away you go. But in environments where you've got sort of more access points, or you want to have the ability to be able to see what's going on. You know, if your client calls up and said there's an issue with it, you want to be able to diagnose it quickly and easily. And having the CloudKey, that will enable that because it's always got the statistics and the diagnostics running. And of course, it's named CloudKey. So Unifi have what they call a cloud account. Nothing is actually necessarily running on the cloud account, but you link cloud keys to it, and it creates what they call like a hybrid VPN back to that specific cloud key that then enables you. So you can have many cloud keys out at different places, link them all back to your cloud account, and then if you've got an issue with your client, the client calls up and says they're having problems, they're having dropouts, jump onto the cloud from any point that you're at, jump onto that cloud account, and then you can just select which cloud key you want to jump into. Bang, you're in. Then you can see what's going on. You can go, okay, well, you know, they might say, oh, it hasn't been working for 3 days. And you go, well, actually, I can see it only stopped working about an hour ago. So we'll be there as quick as we can, and we'll try and figure out what's going on. So the cloud account matched with the cloud key is quite powerful and works quite well. So again, this runs from the switch. It runs AF Pairway. It does come with a little Ethernet cable that you use, quite a sturdy little Ethernet cable. It also comes with a Kingston 8 gig SD card for storing all that information, and you'll notice it also has a micro USB down the bottom, and yes, you can power it from that. So if you don't have a PoE switch, you can use like your standard sort of 5-volt phone charger, back it in the bottom of it, and away it goes. So they are quite handy, those units, and I would recommend if you are doing an install where there is quite a few access points, or if this is going to be a client that does want managed service, the CloudKey is quite good, and it's, you know, sub $150, somewhere around that sort of area, generally speaking. So they're not overly expensive really for what you get. Any questions about the CloudKey? Okay. Unifi does not just have access points. The idea of Unifi is, like it says, unified. So they do like to have the ability to have more than just their access points in the software. So their design is to have it so you've got your gateway router, your switches, and your access points all in the one software. This helps for obviously diagnostics to find where the breakdown is. Is it the access points? Is it the switches? Or is it something to do with the router? Is there a firewall or maybe some ports blocked that's stopping it? So the Unifi software also includes the security gateways. Now these are a gateway router. They do have a lot of neat functionalities. Really good firewall. Probably not at the same level of, I would say, your standard enterprise router. If you were going into an environment where there was going to be a lot of layer 3 stuff going on, I would probably recommend to still use, like for instance in the Ubiquiti range, still use the Edge Max product. It's going to give you much more flexibility when it comes to routing protocols and doing that sort of stuff. The Unifi Security Gateway is more of just what it says it is. It's a gateway router. So you've got your DHCP, you've got your firewall setups that you can do, you've got all your analytics so you can track what's actually coming through the connection, all that sort of stuff. But as far as some really some sort of higher end layer 3 rules, we did find once they sort of come out that a lot of people were having quite a difficulty. They can do some of the higher end stuff, but it's all got to be through CLI. And Ubiquiti's CLI has never been the funnest thing to use. So if you're not familiar with using CLI, or you're not a big fan of using the command line interface, then yeah, it might be easier in some environments to go with the Edge router. The only difference is obviously the Edge router won't go onto that Unifi software. So the benefit of the Unifi Security Gateway is that it's on that software, so you can see what's going on. But they do come in 2 flavors. So there is a domestic style unit, a security gateway. It's only sort of the same size as your sort of standard router, about that big. It's got 3 ports on it. It's got a WAN port, a VoIP port, and it did have a 3rd port for future use. I do believe they have now enabled that 3rd port to be used as well in later firmware releases. But that's a good little unit, and like I said, quite small, easy to set up. That's where that would be positioned in most sort of home environments, is between your Telstra or ADSL router. That would between that and your switch is where it would sit. So you'd bridge your router modem to that unit into the WAN port, and then do all your rulings, all your firewalls and all that sort of stuff, DHCP server, like I said, radius, any of that sort of stuff from that point, and then go to your switches and so on and so forth. So it's not a modem, and it does not hold the software on there. So when they first got released, a lot of people bought them and believed that had the software on them and you could run them from that software, but they do not have the software on there. They are just simply a gateway router. And obviously there's a more enterprise unit, a rack mount unit. It's got more ports, you do a bit more with it, and you can do, I believe you can do some link aggregation between the ports, stuff like that, so you can do a bit of load balancing and that with them. But yeah, they're fundamentally the same unit. I mean, it's all controlled by the same software. So basically what that one can do also, but this one's just more of an enterprise unit. It's got the rack mount. So if you've got an instance where it's got to sit in a rack, that's the unit you want to be looking at. Any questions about the Unifi Security Gateways? Rightio, Unifi Switches. So Unifi have a whole bundle of different switches. They have, as you can see there, 24 and 48 port rack mount versions. They also now support much smaller units as well, but they were their initial units. They are designed to go in a rack, so keep that in mind. They are not that quiet, I suppose you would say. A lot of people, when they first got them, took them out, and they wanted like a 48 port switch, and they wanted to install it in a home environment. They put it in and it went up and went whoosh, and it started up. They're meant to sit in a rack, and they were designed as such. So some people do complain about the noise that they get out of them, but they weren't designed necessarily to go into a home environment. They were designed to go into a switch rack. So here you can see the different Unifi switches they currently have. So obviously you have your 24 and 48 port switches. They support the 24 port, has 24 ports including 2 standard SFP ports. The 48 port has 48 gigabit ports, 2 standard SFP and 2 SFP plus if you're doing some trunking between switches. Got that 10 gigabit port, so you can do your 10 gigabit trunking. Pairway on the 24s and 48s is across all of them, so you've got AF and AT across all ports, as well as 24 volt across all ports, obviously except for the SFP ports. And they have different total wattages, so what you want to have a look at is look at your wattage, see how much actual power wattage you need, and then base the switch off that. So there is 24 comes in a 250, a 500 watt version. The 48 comes in a 500 and a 750 watt version. Generally speaking, the higher wattage versions are if you're running, again, PTZ cameras, stuff like that, stuff that chews quite a lot of power. 8 port, so they do have a 8 port switch with no PoE. So if you're just wanting simply just a switch that you can manage from the software without using the Pairway, or if you've already got existing injectors that you want to use, want to save a little bit of money, they do have just a standard Unifi switch without any Pairway. That's quite cost effective. They have a 860 watt version, so it's a quite low power as far as in regards to the rest of them, but they do have a 60 watt version. The 60 watt version only supports Pairway on the last 4 ports, and it's only AF. They do not have 24 volt passive support on those units. Only AF Pairway. In the case of the Unifi access points these days, it's probably not much of an issue because they all support AF, but do just keep that in mind that they are AF only, them last 4 ports. Then you have the 8150 watt. That can have Pairway across all ports again, across all ports. But the good thing about this is it's also got SFP. So you can run them, if you've got an instance where you've got 24 or 48 port in a rack, and you need to get one down the other end of the warehouse, you can run a fibre optic cable down there, plug it in by SFP if it's going to be beyond your 100 metres. You know, because obviously Ethernet failed than that, you can use the 8150 to get that distance out to where you need to get it to. You have a 16 port. Pretty self-explanatory, very similar to the 24s and 48s. 2 SFP ports on there as well, 150 watt. And then you have the Unifi Switch 16 XG. So they are 16 10 gig SFP ports. So that's if so say you've got quite a few 48 ports or 24 ports, and you want to trunk them all together, you would trunk them through this switch, and then out you go. So that's your high-end SFP switch that you would use. And again, these are all Unifi. They all sit on the Unifi platform. They're all visible from the software, all controllable from the software. Nice and easy to set up and use. Any questions about any of those switches?
We've got budgets for all the switches, like you say 150 watt, but for the individual port, normally, because we have, if you're talking about a PTZ camera, so they might be like 25 watt, and the individual budget for a AF would be like something like 15 watt only.
So they support AF AT. So the AF AT, so I think they go up to around 40 watts per port.
60 watt switch is AF only. Can you run a PDF?
Yeah, sorry, when I say AF only, I should verify AF/AT. So AT is that high wattage. So they do have, I think they're around 40 watts per port. I can find that out for you if you want, but I believe it's around 40 watts output per port that it will go up to. So they will run a PTZ camera. But the only thing they don't run is the higher end microwave stuff that draws like 50, 60 watts. They won't go up past that level. But yeah, they will run a PTZ camera.
What would be the draw on a AC Pro?
I think they sit around. They sit around between 8 and 15 watts. So they're not heaps. You know, if you're only running Unifi, like access points from one of these switches, generally you only need the lower tier, 250 watt, or if you've got a 48 port, 500 watt. You only need to have the higher output if you're running other stuff, such as, you know, if you've got your 7-inch touchscreen phone systems, stuff like that are drawing quite a bit more power, or PTZ cameras, stuff like that, that's when you would go for the higher wattage. But generally speaking, any of the Unifi devices or anything like that, you could fill a whole switch and still have room to spare as far as the actual power budget goes. Yeah, so I know the EDU unit draws about 22 watts, and that's the highest draw on any of the access points. So.
The fibre connector that you've got on the end of that, do you know what type it is?
Dual LC. It'll support multi-mode and single mode. So typically when they first come out, we were using MikroTik dual LC SFPs with them as a lower cost. You can use HPs, that sort of stuff as well with them. There is a list on Ubiquiti support. If you go to Ubiquiti support, have a look under the Unifi. There is an actual list there. It says supported SFPs, and you can go through there. And obviously now Unifi or Ubiquiti have released their own range of SFPs, single mode and multi-mode. So they've now got their own SFPs that will work obviously with their switches they've got. But yeah, dual LC, SFP, and SFP Plus. Rightio, Unified Video. So just a real quick touch on Unified Video. Any of you guys out there do any video security stuff as well? Yeah, a little bit of video security stuff. So Unified Video doesn't actually sit as of yet on the rest of the Unifi software. It is still its own separate entity, but it is still software defined, so very similar as far as the actual design model around how the software works and where it can be implemented. So they do have their own MVR and everything for it, but fundamentally it's still a software defined camera system. As you can see, you can either use it on a servers, you can even set them up from your mobile phones, run them from that. So they're very easy, very nice to set up, and they've got quite good cameras actually. So they've really only got the 2 cameras these days. They did have a few other models, but they've cut them down to these 2. They're both of them are 1080p. That one is the outdoor unit, and also has IR, so it has built-in IR. So if you're installing it in an outdoor area, when it gets night time, you will be able to see some, I think it's around 5 to 10 meters, depending on the density, on how dark it is and stuff like that. You will be able to see a bit further. They also do have an IR extender that will just literally slips and clips onto the front. That powers on, and that will give you up to around 20 meters in front, and it will also open up the full width of the camera, so you can see all the edges of where the actual cameras be able to see. It really does get quite a bit of distance out of those IR extenders, so they're quite good. And then you have your indoor unit, your dome style unit. Obviously, you can take the cover off. You can move the actual lens around to get to the angle you need to get to. It's not a PTZ. So you can't control it from the controller. It is still just something that you manually will set up. But they're quite good and can go on the wall or the ceiling. So they're sort of a bit versatile as to where you can mount them. And the mounting system is a lot better than what the old mounting system used to be with the old domes. So they're not designed just to sit on wall on roof tiles. You can put them on plaster walls and stuff like that now as well. Much more simpler. They do have built-in microphone on them too. Probably one thing I should say is the built-in microphone on them, as far as the last time I checked anyway, you weren't able to turn it off. So you could mute the video, but the microphone was always recording. So keep that in mind when you're going out and installing it, because some people do get a little bit funny about that sort of stuff. So make sure that they're aware that the microphone on them is on all the time. If the video is recording and it's recording back to the MVR, it will be recording video and sound at all times. Any questions about any of that? Okay, and their Unifi NVR. The Unifi NVR is pretty much just a Linux-based computer that they've put a 500 gigabit hard drive in it, gigabyte hard drive in there. Again, software defined, so it just sits on the same layer 2 network as your cameras. Your cameras will then phone home back to this device, adopt them across, very similar to how you work the access points. So if you use the Unifi access points, again, the software is very similar between the two. They're not integrated yet as into the one system, but they are very similar in the way they're designed. You will notice that it does have some USB ports, some USB 3 ports on there. You can put external hard drives on there, but there is a bit of mucking around to do it. It's not a plug and play situation. You do have to jump into the CLI, change some stuff around, get that happening. Again, Ubiquiti have that information on their support page. You can find the step-by-step guide on how to put larger hard drives and stuff onto that system. Do you need the NVR? No, you don't, because it's software defined. So you can build your own computer if you wanted to. If you need something with a bit more power to handle some more cameras, that sort of stuff, have a bit more storage space, you can build your own PC, put the software on there and run that as the NVR. The NVR is literally just a Linux-based computer with a hard drive in it. That is all, nothing special about it. So keep that in mind when you're going out there and designing it. Any questions about the NVR? Okay, Ubiquiti have a nice little network planner. Now this is just a very basic overlay to give you a rough idea. Again, I do recommend that all of you out there who are doing something, especially in the home environment, make sure that you don't just go out there willy-nilly and just put as many access points as you can. The network designer will give you a rough idea. You can take that tool, use it, give you a rough idea on how many access points you need per square meterage, and then you can sort of base a quote on that. And then obviously as you get out to the on-site, you can test it and see if that's correct or if you need a few more. And it's pretty straightforward, as you can see there. Gives you a bit of an idea on how to set it up. And we'll give you a calculation on what it's recommending you use to get to where you need to get to. for that. So it's a nice little, easy little tool that you can use. Does quite well. Did we run through the highlight? How are we doing for time?
We're a little
Time up, yeah.
bit behind.
Are we? Okay. Well, you can just jump online anyway and see. Obviously, this is just a YouTube video, so you just jump online. If you want to check out the highlights, Ubiquiti is very community based. So if you really, if you jump on YouTube and look up anything Ubiquiti, there's probably about 5 or 10 people that have done it before and have got 5 or 10 different ways that they've done it. So if you're not too sure about something, YouTube definitely with Ubiquiti is your friend. Jump on there, have a bit of a look. It'll give you, like, for instance, this one is highlights. You can see setups. You can see different ways that people have done stuff. So jump on YouTube and have a bit of a look at their YouTube channel. It's quite good. Ubiquiti support. Okay, so a lot of people ask, come in here and you know, they're not quite 100% sure on how to do things, or they're running into some issues, stuff like that. Ubiquiti don't have necessarily support that's local based here in Australia, but they do have 24/7 support, both through their in-app support, so you can use it through their Unifi app, like a little chat box. You can talk to them there, or you can email them at support@ubnt.com over in the US, and they'll get back to you. So that's pretty much going to be your go-to for your support. If you are running into some issues that are a bit more than I've just plugged it in, it's not working, something that's actually going on with the network that you need diagnosed, it's best to contact Ubiquiti support and go through those guys, because they obviously know their product quite well. This is the support page. Support page, Ubiquiti support page is quite good these days. It didn't used to be, but they have made a dedicated Ubiquiti support page that is separate to their community page, and it's got quite a lot of the FAQs on there and the answers for that. And obviously, downloads. So any of this stuff we've talked to today about any of the software, any of the information, data sheets, all that sort of stuff can be found on the Ubiquiti website under the download section, and you just simply choose which area from their product line that you want to look at. And it's got all the information there, case studies, all that sort of stuff. So you can go in there and have a bit of a browse and get yourself familiar. Rightio, that's about it. So any final questions or anything that anyone wants to ask about any of the stuff I've talked about, or anything that is just has anything to do with wireless in general? Huh?
Awesome.
All good?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Hopefully I've enlightened a few of you on a few different aspects, and just given you a bit of a better idea on Ubiquiti and what they have to offer. So, thank you.